Welcome, welcome everyone. We're going to let everyone come into the room. We've got an exciting panel for you today. Thank you all for joining this afternoon. Welcome, welcome everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. I'm Theresa Harrison. I lead the Environmental Social Governance Services for EY. My team is responsible globally for the EY supplier diversity process, as well as our sustainable procurement. And I am so pleased to be here with you today with this illustrious panel that's going to share so many great tips and tools for you around investment and investment in your businesses. So while entrepreneurs have struggled over the past year, they've also seized innovation, and their resilience has been outstanding. So women, especially minorities, continue to lack adequate access to capital to start and grow their businesses. So this conversation will look at the current environment and share best practices, opportunities, and the ways that both public and private are investing in minority-owned businesses. I'm excited to share with you our esteemed panel. We have Shelly Bell, founder and CEO of Black Girl Ventures. We have Cahn, founder and CEO of IFundWomen. We have Haines, director of Grow with Google. And last but surely not least, we have Alec Paxton, managing director of Women Issues U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. All of their bios are on the website. Please read all the fantastic things that these rock stars are doing. It is amazing, amazing work. So the first question I have is going to be directed at all of you, and I'm going to start with Shelly because she has the most beautiful background I've ever seen on a Zoom call. And so as women, in particular women of color, drive economic growth by establishing new businesses at an historic rate, we need to look to be much more intentional about creating opportunities. So how are you advancing initiatives, pipeline, and resources for female minority entrepreneurs? So I'm going to share, that's going to be the question that all of the panel will ask, and then we'll go into some deeper dialogue with members of the panel. Shelly?
Yeah, thank you, Theresa. This is awesome. So glad to be here. At Black Girl Ventures, we work to create access to capital, capacity, and community for Black and Brown women founders. We believe that this is what the support that helps them become sustainable and then creating intergenerational wealth. At the moment, we have a 9-month accelerator program. We also have a BGV pitch, and BGV pitch is our core kind of identity, I guess, at this point, but it's what people know us for, is our grant program. So imagine Kickstarter meets Shark Tank. So women pitch, and then the audience actually donates and votes with their dollars for the pitch that they favor. I launched this in a house in Southeast DC, all because of the news that less than 1% of women were receiving access to capital, yet Black women growing business at 6 times the national average, and that was pre-COVID. So, looking at the ingenuity of Black and Brown founders, my thought was, let's just do something. Why don't we do something about that? And so it literally was getting together and putting our money up. Now, to date, we have funded 130 women. We have efforts across 12 cities. We're the largest entrepreneur support organization on the East Coast, specifically for Black and Brown women. It has been amazing. We have worked with large companies, Google, Nike, Visa. The ingenuity of Black and Brown women is what we focus on, and looking at these 3 C's: capital, capacity, and community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shelly. Capital and capital. All right. Karen, can you share a little bit about what you're doing in this space?
Yeah, so we have been intentional since day one. IFundWomen is a 4-year-old fintech startup. We are a 2-sided funding marketplace. On one side of the marketplace, you've got all the women-owned businesses in the US. You've got about 13 million, 1,800 net new businesses are started every single day in this country, 89% of which are by women of color. We knew that when we started the business. And on the other side of the marketplace, you've got all of the people who want to fund them. So individuals, enterprises, funds, family offices, brands, et cetera. And when we started the business, there's no BS here. We had 3 white co-founders who were founders of a first startup that failed because we couldn't get funding. So we pivoted and we shut down the first startup, and we were trying to tackle this problem of the complete lack of funding and the inequities and, frankly, the biased and racist algorithms that were determining who got funding, both in the venture ecosystem and in the banking ecosystem, whether it's loans or credit scores or credit lines, et cetera. So when we started doing our research about who our customers were going to be, and we knew that at least 70% of our customers were going to be women of color, we hired a predominantly BIPOC team, period. Engineering, product, marketing, coaching, across all disciplines. And that's, and on our cap table we're fully owned by women, and majority BIPOC women. And to me, it starts on the cap table, right? So we obviously are all about our number one North Star KPI, key performance indicator, is funding for women entrepreneurs. For us, that means majority BIPOC female entrepreneurs. But when we think about systemic change and intergenerational wealth, which is my personal passion from when I was a kid, it's a longer story, which we will not get into. It really, for me, in the startup ecosystem, having grown up at Google and YouTube and understanding what it means to IPO and make a lot of money from being on a cap table, to me, it's all about putting BIPOC people on a cap table. So I made damn sure that with this startup, we founded it with BIPOC people on the cap table. My team are BIPOC individuals. And when we exit or go public, they're going to get rich. So yes, our number one core KPI is funding for women entrepreneurs, specifically BIPOC entrepreneurs. But, a sort of side mission for me personally is intergenerational wealth. And that starts and ends with the cap table.
Great, Karen, great. Alex, moving on to you from a government perspective. You want to share some insights?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So yeah, as Theresa mentioned, I'm the acting managing director for General Investing at the U.S. Development Finance Corporation. And at the DFC, we're the U.S. government's development finance institution. And so we support entrepreneurs and businesses in emerging markets in order to address critical development challenges in those markets. We work around the world, everything from microfinance to healthcare to energy. And we primarily provide loans and investment capital to businesses that are operating in those markets. And we've always invested in women, but it's really over the last few years that DFC has been intentionally focused on serving women entrepreneurs, a program that we call 2X for the multiplier effect of investing in women. We see this intentionality around gender equity as opening significant investment opportunities. So McKinsey estimates that if women participated equally in the economy globally, GDP would rise between $12 and $28 trillion. And the World Bank tells us that, that gender diverse fund managers return an average of 20% higher net IRRs to their investors. So our work to advance gender equity has been met with incredible interest from our clients. We've deployed over $4 billion of our own capital in over 120 separate transactions that meaningfully advance gender equity and that are in women-owned and women-led businesses globally. An example of one of these transactions that we work with is the CEF Emergency Facility for Women in Small and Medium Enterprises, which is a global loan facility that supports emergency lending to small and medium enterprises that are owned or led by women that have been significantly affected by COVID-19. So when I look forward, I see a ton of momentum in the gender lens investing space. Internationally, which is the perspective that I'm coming from, we see investors of all from impact investors to pension funds increasingly investing capital with a gender lens and focusing on finding and supporting women entrepreneurs. So I think that there's a lot of, coming from a slightly different perspective from the international perspective, I think that there's also movement there and really kind of exciting to bring that perspective. But back to you, Theresa.
Great, thanks, Alex. And can't wait to hear more about the international aspect. So Jesse, last but not least, grow with Google. How are you doing initiatives, pipelines, resources for female minority entrepreneurs? How are you advancing that at Google?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on the panel today. Grow with Google is Google's initiative to, at the highest level, create opportunity for everyone. And in doing that, we think a lot about small businesses and entrepreneurs, and really believe that having the digital skills to keep up with this increasingly digital world that we all live in is super important. And so a big focus of Grow with Google is empowering small business owners and entrepreneurs with those digital skills. And we do this in a bunch of ways. We have a whole portfolio of programs, and we actually work very closely with our product teams as well. One that I'll call out is our Digital Coaches program, which specifically focuses on bringing expertise to communities of color in our backyards, in the cities where Google has offices or data centers. This started out as a small program in just a handful of cities, and we've now expanded it to 20 cities with entrepreneurs from those communities working with small business owners and entrepreneurs. And I think the big insight that's driven this program is that it's not just about training, it's about community. And our digital coaches not only deliver meaningful workshops, but they form connections. And we have stories of individuals who continue to learn and then come back for advice. And in some cases, and we might get to this a little later, we've got, individuals for whom this coaching has really made a difference in their trajectory. And just coincidentally, Shelly was a part of the Digital Coaches program in its early days. So I hope we can get back to that. And then I also just want to mention Google for Startups, which is kind of a sister program to Grow with Google. This is really all about leveling the playing field for underrepresented founders. And something that I'd love to talk about more later is our $5 million Black Founders Fund, where we have recently awarded $5 million of non-diluted capital to Black founders, and that's been a really exciting part of the Google for Startups effort in the recent year.
Speaking of that, kind of financing options and those funds being developed, I'm going to kind of turn the conversation to Shelly and Cahn for a minute to talk about how is this access to often dependent or on personal networks of privilege, but historically here in the U.S., minority suppliers have faced most of the difficulty in securing funding. So what can you tell us about the state of financing for female-owned, minority-owned businesses right now? And how has the investment community evolved into businesses seeking and capital in this kind of virtual world that we've been living in for the last 12 months? Cahn, I'll start with you.
So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. So we know the data, 2.3% of venture capital in 2020 went to female founded companies. 0.64% went to BIPOC female founders. 0.64, egregious. So things are not changing in the VC space fast enough, frankly. There are now more, the good news is, in the last year, we've seen so many more Black-owned funds, which is great, and big banking institutions like B of A and PayPal and American Express making large investments in those BIPOC fund managers, and that's good, right? We at IFundWomen firmly believe in alternative sources of capital because for women, and specifically women of color, we have to. Right? We have to do for ourselves because nobody is doing for us. So IFundWomen, obviously we talked about is, largely BIPOC founders. And to date, we've empowered them to raise over $80 million in startup capital that they would not have had access to if we hadn't hung up a shingle 4 years ago and said, we care about this thing. Who else cares? And a lot of people cared. And we're not even cracking the surface, right? So my first employee is a woman named Olivia Owens. Olivia is a Black woman. She is the founder and creator of IFundWomen of Color, which launched pre-pandemic in January of 2020 on stage at the Women's March, which was amazing. And Olivia was our first employee back in 2016. And we were doing our research, and she was on the marketing team at that point. And I said, Olivia, like, shouldn't we have a space just for our BIPOC founders for discoverability? I came from YouTube, which discoverability of creative entrepreneurs was impossible. If you wanted to try, it was just hard. Discoverability on any big platform is hard. So I said, don't we want to do this? She's like, no, it's kind of redundant. Like our whole platform, most of our platform is, Black and brown women anyway. So what's the difference? So I'm like, okay. So we did a 3-year beta test, essentially, to see what the funding volume was. So remember, we're 70% BIPOC, 30% white. I'm just going to keep it basic numbers because this is roughly what it is. And the funding, no joke, was 70% white founders and 30% BIPOC founders. Not surprising, because what is crowdfunding? Crowdfunding is when you, the entrepreneur, go out and raise small increments of money from lots of people that you know in your personal and professional network to add up to just enough to get your business off the ground. And for BIPOC founders, by and large, that is the challenge. The network is the challenge. The network is your net worth. And so after the 3 years, I was like, Olivia, enough. We have to start. We have to create this space that is highly sponsorable. We are not a media company, but we knew, and again, this is before the pandemic. This was before George Floyd was murdered. This was before all the things were happening. I was like, we have to create a space where people can discover these innovative women, like they're changing the world, truly, but have no visibility at all and no network to get them the visibility. And that's the key component to IFundWomen of Color. So since we launched it, it's been alive for 1 year. We did the data run at the end of 2020, and the cumulative funding volume over 4 years of IFundWomen.com went to parity in 1 year by doing that. 1 year. So it's now 51% BIPOC founders, 49% white founders. And I think that's pretty damn good. And
Absolutely.
that tells me that we're not celebrities. I'm not sitting here as like Halle Berry or Reese Witherspoon or somebody famous, with a huge megaphone. We're regular, everyday, brilliant women who have a mission and a passion and a heart and wanted to hit a goal. So what I would leave the audience with is like, if you believe in something, you can actually get it done.
Thanks, Karen. Shelly, when you talked about your great pitch programs and the access to that, what else do you have for us on the different types of, what are you seeing in the investment community?
Yeah, I think, I want to level set a little bit around investment, because I think that Shark Tank made it real sexy, but the reality is it doesn't move fast. I mean, the average firms, they may invest in less than 10 people a year. So if the number is less than 1%, we have a ways before, unless there's more creation of funds by Black people, which is happening. But even with that, we think about the SEC rules. You can't, so you have to have a network to raise the fund. So I think there's so many pieces around that where people are actually in some ways legally disadvantaged, right? In this way, like the SEC regulates this. And so if you don't have a network, you can't do a blast out if you're raising a fund. So there's like all these little rules around like how you have to raise. So even a Black founder, a Black investor wanting to raise a fund has to have a network. On top of, the Black founder who's just wanting to build a company, having to have a network. So, Black and brown founders face those 3 challenges: access to capital, influential networks, and ability to hire. And I believe it all comes from who you know. Those things come from who you know. So when we look at and a lot of times, it's not a mystery why people don't have Black people on different places. If it doesn't look like we're supposed to be there, then we're not there. That's just it. Like if it's like, oh, that doesn't look like it's for me, they're not speaking my language, that it's got a lot of white space and no color. Like a lot of those things are very much visual. And so welcoming Black founders in, like with all of the investors that made the calls out for, hey, we want to, we'll mentor you, we'll take those calls, things like that. I'm a serial optimist. So I'm hoping that, what that creates is more access to influential networks, and that people are passing people through the networks. And Black Girl Ventures, one of the reasons why we do it the way we do it, in terms of like, we're the biggest, most of the time, the biggest influencer with them. So crowdfunding alone is an opportunity cost. You got to have a great video. You got to go out and find people. You still have that, these things are women. Don't get me wrong. Women outpace men when it comes to crowdfunding. We rock at it. We get it in. But we realized that we needed to invest our influence. So my hypothesis was, could I build something that was highly influential where I could invest that influence in the founders? And that's what we've been successful at. And that's what I'm asking all of my corporate partners to do. That's what I'm asking Nike to do. That's what I'm asking Visa to do. That's what I'm asking Warby Parker to do. Like, I'm asking them, yes, for your dollars, give us all the dollars. We want the coins, but invest your influence. And so I'm excited for what we're doing with Nike, because they're launching us big this weekend. Last night, I had opportunity to be on for the NBA All-Star Draft to talk about Black Girl Ventures as Katie and LeBron are drafting their teams, and have them actually acknowledge it on TNT, right? But in those images they showed, it wasn't just me. It was all of our founders on stage pitching and getting that visibility on that stage. And so people can look for them. And so I think, the crowdfunding, the influence part is huge across the board. But women are building businesses. We're a lot of at first, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was hard. It was like, oh my God, we heard all of those stories. We pivoted to a virtual community. We started pumping out content every week. We were meeting with them every week. We created a virtual co-working space. They are peer mentoring each other, becoming customers of each other, telling each other where to apply for things. Putting them together actually gave them a community space where they started to grow more capital together. Right. So I think this community piece is not just a nice to have, it's a must have.
The village, the village to help everybody get through. Absolutely, absolutely. Just for the audience, we do have a Q&A box. So if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will be taking audience questions. So if you have something that's yearning at your heart to get the answer to, I'm sure we've got a great panel to answer those questions. I'm going to kind of switch it up from a perspective of Alex. Going to look to you to say, how are you working across the government to provide inclusive solutions that mobilize private sector investments in global women's economic empowerment? I think it was your lens talking about emerging markets and things like that. So it'd be good to get that lens from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a good one. So I think gender equality and support for underserved communities is just a really important part of the Biden-Harris administration. And this priority spans across the U.S. government, both domestically and internationally. And we work really closely here at the Development Finance Corporation to coordinate with the other government agencies to make sure that we're collectively advancing gender equality and to support women entrepreneurs all over the globe. As the Biden-Harris team comes on board to the Development Finance Corporation, we're really thinking through how we're going to double down on this effort and double down on the work that we've done so far. So $7 billion mobilized, $4 billion of our own capital moved. And the question is, where do we go from here? And every answer so far has been, let's do more. So that's, I think, really exciting. And I think, as you noted, or is kind of inherent in the question, and how I think about my job isn't just to move money from the government to private sector, but to mobilize others to come alongside us. I think the evidence is in that women are fantastic investment opportunities, that is a good place to invest money if you are an investor. And I think what we're trying to do is to spread that word and to make sure we're crowding in pension funds, that we're crowding in not only the US government, but we're actually working across governments. There's something we call the 2X challenge to really start a movement across development finance institutions, across private sector partners, to really support women-led and women-owned businesses in emerging markets. That movement so far, this 2X challenge, has catalyzed over $4.5 billion in a year and a half. And so we're really I think the DFC is kind of really trying to push the envelope when it comes to supporting women in emerging markets and making sure that others understand that is the direction that we're all moving. So yeah, I think that's
great, Alex. Thank you. That's I think it's imperative. Jesse, I'm going to move to you from the commercial aspect. Google has some amazing programs, and I think with the start of COVID-19 pandemic, you actively been partnering in new and creative ways to help entrepreneurs. And some of the stories you've told on kind of our pre-calls, and just on this call, seeing some of the outcomes. So some of the actually live and in-person examples with Shelly and her organization. So with the funding, how do you view these partnerships strengthen your work at Google? But can you talk about the creative ways that you're really looking to promote minority entrepreneurs as well?
Yeah, well, I can't. One of the things that we've got programs where, the Digital Coaches Program, the Black Founders Fund. Another thing that we felt was really important to do as the pandemic was really starting to take its toll was to launch the Grow with Google Small Business Fund, making $180 million in low interest loans available through CDFIs, really focusing on small businesses who are having trouble accessing capital through the traditional banking system, et cetera. And we earmarked 50 million of that specifically for Black-owned businesses. And that's been a really incredible partnership, and to hear the stories of the businesses that have been able to make it through has been certainly inspiring. I think from a Google perspective, we're always challenging ourselves to think, what is the only Google could do it sort of thing? How can we really use our products to advance, to live our values? And I think one thing that we've done is make it easier for customers, for people in the community to find Black-owned and women-owned businesses. So when a business is online, they can actually put a little badge, a little attribute on their Google listing, and it's just a little symbol along with their hours and so on and so forth, so that when consumers are searching for a cafe or whatever it is in their neighborhood, they can say, oh, that's a women-owned business. Oh, that's a Black-owned business. And I'm going to go and make that decision to support that business. And that's been really exciting. And we've been doing a lot of amplification of stories of people and the businesses that they love in their community. And as a platform with a huge audience, that's something that Google can do and do well. It's been exciting to see that visibility. So yeah, product and programs. I think that's the winning combination.
Awesome. And I think Shelly, I was going to say, Shelly's she's been one of the recipients of some of these products. And we just wanted to hear from her, kind of give the audience just a flavor of what you've gotten out of, I think, the digital coach and a number of the different products that Jessie shared with us.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I would say that one of the things I was going to say to the connectivity is that not only through the Digital Coaches Program and me doing a lot of activation on the ground in DC around all kinds of programming, marketing, all the skills that I learned from being a business owner, I was able to teach or share with the businesses in the community. I met my COO that way. I brought in 2 or 3 volunteers to Black Girl Ventures that way. I also became synonymous with Google in DC. So it was you want to work with Google, you need to talk to Shelly Bell, but through that was able to help other businesses partner with Google. So I think economic development in this way, it just keeps stretching out, right? So it's I hired my CEO, who is now my COO, full time. She met me while I was speaking at one of the Google activations that I had done. One of the women who came through Google through the BGV New York, which we're at Google for, is actually now a part of the Google Founder Academy. So it is in this way, it's people actually getting to connect with people. And I think this is something that Google is getting better at, because during that time, people were like, people work at Google? And I'm like, yes. So I really, that community touch literally is everything. Not only that, I learned a lot about the kind of work environment I wanted to create. because I got to experience firsthand this idea of like, you know, if we take care of you, you will take care of the work. And I had never worked at a workplace like that before. And so while I was doing the work at Google, I really had the opportunity to just experience what that meant and not try to create that for my employees now. So a lot of gifts, you know, the gift that keeps on giving.
Love
In that
it.
sense.
Love it. Yeah.
Love it.
So
She
Love it.
drank the Kool-Aid. It's a good Kool-Aid.
I
It
know.
is.
It's a
It is.
good global Kool with seaweed snacks in the kitchen. It's all of that.
Oh, how we miss those as we work from home.
I know.
I lost 20 pounds when I left Google just from not being near micro kitchens, literally.
So is there any questions from the audience? Anyone want to raise their hands and ask a question? I have questions for days that I could ask the whole panelists, but I want to open this up to everyone on the call to ask a question. So does anyone have a question? I think Shelly, someone wants to facilitate an introduction to get to know how to work with you more. So I'm sure Melissa can take care of that. For Jesse, there's a question for you. Are there any plans to grow with Google to emerging markets?
Yeah, Grow with Google is in emerging markets. It's a global initiative. And so we're doing the same type of work that we're doing here in the United States, providing digital skills training to job seekers and small businesses, providing access, leveling the playing field for underrepresented founders in countries all over the world. And I'm happy to connect you with resources, but if you just Google Grow with Google in whatever the region is that you're interested in, you'll find lots of great resources and information.
Great, thanks, Jesse. Alex, this one's for you. How can local government leaders best support efforts to help women entrepreneurs right now? Any ideas on that?
I was hoping that somebody on the panel could answer that. My focus is so international that I actually don't have a great answer for it. I was curious, maybe Shelly or Sophia or Karen might have an idea.
Yeah, I do. But you have some thoughts, Karen?
What was the question?
How can local government leaders best support efforts to help women entrepreneurs right now?
Oh yeah, PPP baby. Okay, so the Biden-Harris administration has made the PPP so much more accessible for women and minority entrepreneurs. And if you are listening to this and you are a 1099, a sole proprietor, even if you didn't pay yourself and you're a startup founder who did not pay yourself, but you've got a 1099 and a Schedule C, if you are a veterans organization, if you obviously are an LLC, a C Corp, it's so much easier to get a PPP loan, which is a forgivable loan, also known as a grant. We got one last year. It really helped. We don't qualify this year, which is a bummer, which is great because we grew, but a bummer. But PS, go to IFundWomen.com/PPP, or just go to our homepage and click on apply for PPP. We've already deployed $11 million in loans just over the last month from people clicking through to our website and going to our partner. We're working with ACAP and the Loan Source, which is a top 5 PPP lender. Yeah, that's what they're doing. The Biden-Harris administration is doing a phenomenal job of rolling out the Relief Act that they have for specifically women and BIPOC people. And they're doing a lot on, childcare. They're doing a lot on entrepreneurship. And there's money there. There is money there, and they are purposely holding it back from the people who got the first tranche of PPP1, which, as we know, we're not going to look backwards. It was all good intentions, but it went to all the wrong people. Riddled with fraud. So this year, much, much different. So I would say the fastest way to capital, if you are a startup founder, an entrepreneur, a gig worker, an Uber driver, a Lyft driver, whatever, go to IFundWomen.com/PPP and apply. You will get your loan as long as you paid taxes. It's as simple as, did you pay taxes? That's how easy it is. If you didn't pay taxes, you don't qualify. That's as simple as I can put it. But if you did,
Oh.
you're going to get some money.
Shelly, you have something to add?
Yeah, for local leaders, look at your infrastructure, evaluate whether or not you have a really strong pathway to work doing business with your government. Make sure that your supplier diversity programs and your there's a strong pathway to them. Also, just like some of the set asides, making sure you have good review metrics in place for whether or not those set asides, the people are doing the diligence on finding people, finding suppliers, making sure there's a really good flow for entrepreneurs to be able to become business owners and do business with the local governments. I think government is transitioning right now from being a place that's like, oh no, you come to us, to having to be the people who go out now. So I would say, like, look out and move out from some of these local government offices into some of these communities. Public-private partnerships are going to be key locally to really like create this economic surge that we need to get consumers working, buying again locally, and to get people, those business owners, back up and running.
Great. Thank you, Shelly. Thank you so much. One of the next questions is actually a really great question. Would love to hear the panel's thoughts on using philanthropic capital for bridging the friends and family funding gap for founders through the DAFs, for example. Any comments on that? Any feedback? Shelly,
yeah, that's exactly what we do to an extent, right? So all of the dollars that come in through these competitions are basically philanthropic dollars, right? And then a large part of our funding comes from working with community foundations and family foundations. As we looked at the DAF, which is something that we're moving into launching, which is a great question. We're looking at how it helps us sustain and invest. So what does that look like for Black Girl Ventures to be able to do the work that we do for a really long time? Also able to, move on to, as Karen mentioned, the cap table and what that looks like to actually be able to invest in our founders. I mean, a lot of people now want to give their capital in that way, and they want to have an investment, and not everybody, like there is a large pool of philanthropists that want to move in this way. So I think from I've seen cities do it, like cities have DAFs, and a couple other entities have DAFs as well. It's a fundraise. So, you still have to put in the work from the standpoint of if you were going after raising any other fund. But there are some really great benefits, I think, if you can, again, grow the network. When I started Black Girl Ventures, I had no idea what kind of language you speak in philanthropy. All right. It's an entirely different language and way of being and talking. And, for me, and I didn't necessarily come from like a bad community, but at the same time, around our dinner table, like the most philanthropic thing we were doing was church. This wasn't like, oh, we give away, 10% of our wealth every year to a charity. That just wasn't something that my, working class parents could do. That wasn't a part of our wheelhouse. I wasn't the Jack and Jill, realm of child. So I learned about the philanthropy through this experience building Black Girl Ventures, learned about a DAF through this experience building Black Girl Ventures, and start to look at the benefits of it. So if you're thinking about starting one, I think it's worth visiting the size checks you can write. If you're thinking about giving to one, I think it's worth visiting. Is that DAF or the people who are managing that really going to be invested in the things that you care about?
Right. Thanks, Shelly. I think this is a great question for everybody. How do we increase entrepreneurship as a career path for young women? So we're saying they're looking at ages 15 to 19. How do we think we can do that?
I don't think we want to. And I run an entrepreneurship company. Theresa, and whoever asked this question, it's a great question. Mm-hmm. The first thing when we get new entrepreneurs that come in the door and they say, I've got this amazing idea and, blah, blah, blah. I've been thinking about it. I'm passionate about it. I always ask them, like, what do you do for your day job? And quite frankly, most of our members have great 9-to-5 jobs at big corporations, a lot of which are represented on this panel. And I say, that's fabulous. Do not quit your great paying day job where you are learning so much of the domain expertise that you may need in your business. Don't quit your day job. do this in your 20% time, which is sort of a Google nomenclature, or do it in the weekends. And once you have strangers who are paying for your product or service, then you got a business. Before then, you've got ideas and theories and things. So in terms of the girls, right? And we work with the Girl Scouts, and like entrepreneurship is a great skill to hone, right? But I would not encourage I have a 14-year-old daughter. Am I encouraging her to go into entrepreneurship? Absolutely not. I'm encouraging her to, I mean, I'd love it if she'd code. She has no interest. I'd love her to, learn how to build stuff, or, learn how to become an expert in some domain and do it at a big corporation where she can learn processes and procedures and how to work with a team, how to deal with bureaucracy, how to deal with, disappointment, how to deal with all the things that we have to learn how to deal with as women. And then once she's at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualized, she puts food on the table, she can pay for her kids' college. I'm a single mom. I came from a middle-class family. My biggest luxury was not having a student loan, which is a luxury. But I didn't, I worked all through college. I worked all through high school. I paid for my own, stuff. And my parents, I support them now. So it's not like I'm a wealthy woman. I'm a wealthy woman now from self-made, but that's because of Google, right? And the only reason I could go and become an entrepreneur in my 40s was because I had money from the Google IPO. And so I would not recommend that unless you're building, unless you're like a mini Ann Wojcicki who's building the next 23andMe, or, you're Greta Thunberg, who's going to, obviously go and change the world and is going to have the resources and the support to propel her genius forward. If you're just a regular person, I would say get awesome experience at a big corporation that you love or a big brand that you use, and get in on the ground floor, work your butt off, get your 401k going, get your, invest your money, open up an Ellevest account. This is not an ad, but, invest your money, save your money, be wise about your future, freeze your eggs. There's a million things I would tell my daughter before I would say be an entrepreneur. Just keeping it real.
Shelly, you have a different kind of view?
I wanted to let Alec and Jesse say something, because if they wanted to, I didn't want to.
Alec,
but
Jesse.
I am like, Karen is talking and I'm cringing inside. But I want to let them be able to respond if they because we have been dominating the conversation.
Alex, Jesse, any comments? Then I'll wrap it up with the final question. I know we're running out of time, Melissa. I see the time.
I want to hear what Shelly has to say.
I do too. I think my read on the question was a little bit different. I feel like it's about helping girls believe that they can do anything. And I do have, and so that's more of that was more of my take on it. And I think it's a lot of the things that we're doing to help girls get the skills they need and see the role models and, see what can become. But so that's my take.
100%. 100% what Jesse said. I think that, a couple of things. One, going into a corporate environment at a level that would sustain you is not always an option for a person of color. So I think like that's great. And I think that is a good advice. I do love, like, you don't just jump off the cliff and build it. Yeah. Like be very strategic, I think is what Karen was saying. It's like, be very strategic about how you go about entrepreneurship because it's not for the faint at heart. I think that, I was laid off twice before I launched my company, and I did a lot of, I built a teepee in my living room and rented it out, and everybody thought I was crazy. So I will say, and I want to always empower girls that, like, if somebody else thinks you're crazy, that has nothing to do with you. You believe, you go for it. If you think you could do it, think big about yourself, ask. All these skills are transferable. You can always go to work. You can always not be at work. Like these skills, we should move in my opinion, we should move into a day and age where it's not a matter of employee or employer. These are both options. You could be anything you want. You could be an employee. You could be an employer. You could be an entrepreneur. You could be, code. I'm a computer scientist. So I sit at the intersection of code and entrepreneurship. And me coding actually gave me a better look on how to solve problems. Therefore, entrepreneurship is an awesome option for me, right? I was never a good employee, on top of workplace discrimination or being a woman at work. There's so many factors there. So yeah, I want to create more entrepreneurs. I want more girls to know about it early. The same way we raise the flag and the banner for coding, the same way we raise the banner and the flag for gaming. It's time for us to raise the banner and the flag for entrepreneurship. You can do it. People should invest in you. And you could try out as many things you want to try out. I don't care I built a TP in my living room. Of course, people thought I was crazy, but it worked because I put it on Airbnb. So somebody else's belief in me is not my problem. I'm going to believe in myself, and all the women and girls out there who want to try something. I'm here for you to try it.
Love it, Shelly. Love it. So I know we have a lot of questions and we're out of time, but I want to ask the panel one last question, just a piece of advice that you would give someone looking for an investment or starting their business, startup, how they can access fund. Alex, I'll start with you. What's your one piece of advice that you would provide?
Yeah, it's a great question. I come from the investing world and I talk to investors all day long. And I think for those investors on the phone, I think if you're not already thinking about how you can increase allocations to women of color, I think that you're already behind and you really need to start now. I think that if you can't figure this out in the next 5 years, you're just going to get left behind. So that's my kind of rallying cry to everyone I talk to.
Great. Jesse?
I have two things. Walk the talk, support women and minority businesses. You can search for them now on Google for Black-owned businesses, and soon you'll be able to search for women-owned. And then, if you know a female entrepreneur or business owners, tell her about Grow with Google. So many, there is so much goodness there. Free classes, free access to resources, to capital, to mentorship, to community and connection. We try to get the word out, but there's nothing like hearing it from a friend.
All right. Karen?
Yes. And Shelly, I've been corrected in more spaces, and I've learned I like being corrected. So I would like to thank you. And it's not that I don't think girls should be entrepreneurs. Obviously, I run an entrepreneurship company, and what we do is we get capital to them. What I was more trying to say was, it's very glamorous. And I think that girls and young women think that we woke up like this and think that they, it's just easy. And it's a very hard life. It's a hard life. And I know that the corporate work environment historically has been hostile for BIPOC people, period, end of story. So there's that. I just want everyone to know that I'm all aware of this. But if you're asking for my real opinion, what do I tell girls is get some skills. And if you really want to build a business around those skills, great, do that. So my final piece of advice for anyone looking to start a business is do not go into debt funding your proof of concept, your MVP, your prototype, all of that. Crowdfund for cash to prove demand for your product or service before you invest in supply. And by supply, I mean wasting years of your life trying to chase an equity round, or worse, going into debt, credit card debt or bank debt, funding your POC, your proof of concept, because, startups, regardless of what you're building, if you're making a jacket or a SaaS B2B solution, you will be prototyping and iterating on that MVP for years. And that is normal, but don't do it going into debt, because failing fast and failing cheap is great. Fail forward, learn, pick yourself up, and do your next thing. I'm a second-time startup founder, like I said. So, it's overnight success takes 5 to 10 years, and just don't go into debt funding the earliest stages of your startup. That's my biggest piece of advice.
Shelly?
Yeah, I would say that revenue is the validator. That's always it. When people ask me this, is always my thing. Revenue is a validator. People don't validate you. your sister's brother's cousin who had a really great idea one time. Like, they don't validate you. Revenue validates you. Or rather, revenue validates not you, but your product or business. So focus on revenue. Focus on it hard and fast. Be agile for it. Pivot, move things around, tweak it, do what you have to do to get to the revenue, because that's what's going to prove out whether or not something will really work in the marketplace and whether or not you have a viable business model. So focus on revenue. Revenue is the validator, not people.
Well, thank you all, Alex, Karen, Jesse, Shelly. Thank you so much for your insight. And a big thank you to all of you who are on the line listening to this illustrious panel. We thank you for your words, your wisdom, and wish everyone a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go on.